And my question for you is, like you, I am a very proud American Jew, and I support both the United States and Israel very strongly. But I also acknowledge, and as I'm sure you do, that there are very serious issues with both the United States and Israel. So with that being said, I want to know what your greatest criticism of either Israeli domestic or foreign policy is.
Well, Israel's economy is a mess. It's productive, but only because they have great intellectual capital in Israel. The restrictions on labor there are insane. The restrictions on the tax code in Israel is unworkable. They lose an enormous number of good workers every year to other places where people feel like they can make a living better. So that's the biggest problem with the governance of Israel. It lives in a dangerous area of the world. It has to do what it has to do in order to protect itself. But what I see is that they have tremendous internal problems also, because there's broad disagreement about what you owe in terms of military service from certain sectors. As an Orthodox Jew, I think that there should be universal military service in Israel that includes Orthodox Jews and people who study in yeshivot, for example. That's a controversial proposition in many parts of the community to which I belong. Those are a few issues that exist in Israel. As far as the issues that exist in America, I think that the key issue is the one that I discussed earlier, as far as a crisis of definitions, a crisis of the soul. Barack Obama said in his second inaugural address, one of the most astonishing things I've ever heard a politician say. He said in 2012 that the definition of liberty was fungible. He basically said that we don't all have to define liberty in the same way in order for us to agree to live with each other. And at a root level, that's just not true. You actually do have to define liberty in the same way if you wish to live in the same country together. If your definition of liberty is that you get to tell me I can't go to my church or I can't send my kids to a religious school, then your definition of liberty is not in fact liberty, it's cram downs on me. Certain basic terms the same way, liberty would be a fundamental one, duty would be a pretty good one, certain systems of virtue would be a pretty good one, but we disagree on all of these basic terms, and that's where I see the social fragmenting happening. And I think that in the absence of any sort of social fabric, what we've seen is people just beating the living hell out of each other on a political level on questions that we can have nice conversations about all the way through. Right? We can have good conversations about where the policy should go, what are the costs and what are the benefits, what kind of violations of rights are we talking about, are those appropriate? Because we have inalienable rights. There are very few rights that don't have certain levels of restrictions on them. Right? I mean, the fact is that you have freedom of speech, but you don't have the freedom to threaten violence, for example. Right? So we can have all sorts of those conversations, but you do have to have some root basic definitions of things that are good, things that are bad, liberty, freedom, and that is a crisis that I think that America is really going to have to go through for the next few years. And I think that tautological platitudes, which seem to be what both parties specialize in these days, are not going to solve that problem. I don't think that's going to be solved with lower tax rates. I don't think that it's on the right. I don't think it's going to be solved with universal health care on the left. And you're seeing that happen in Europe, where they have a lot of universal health care, and they're still having tremendous social breakdown. And many of those countries are there's a reason that people are rebelling against tax rates in France. And so I'm just going to keep coming back to you until I convince you to like me again. So that I think is the basic math. I think, listen, I'm hopeful for the future of the country, because I think that when we actually think about these things, we tend to agree about them, because we are still living on the fumes of a Judeo-Christian culture that took several thousand years to build. And while we refuse to acknowledge our debts to that Judeo-Christian culture, while we insult it, while we suggest that we can knock out the fundamental pillars of that Judeo-Christian culture and still live with the entire facade that's been built atop it, I think that in the end we'll be made to understand that that's not the case by the simple reality of the world. And so reality always wins, and I think that because reality always wins, we'll get it sooner or later.